Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're in great company. We've got thousands of listeners who have a thirst for continual improvement and raising standards in business. Whether your interest is in quality, sustainability, or risk standards, I'd love to welcome you as a member to our online platform for all things ISO, the ISology Hub. The ISology Hub is the leading place to get access to all of your online resources, from in-depth training courses through to our very popular coffee break training, to templates and action plans and many other resources to help raise standards. As a member, you get access to over 100 courses, taking you from learner to practitioner to leader. The ISology Hub has all the resources that you need, which will really help to make your life easier and to help improve compliance in those business critical areas. So if you'd like access to learning and compliance resources ranging from data privacy to environmental management, anti-bribery, business continuity, quality, health and safety, to name just but a few, the list is endless actually, then we'd love for you to come and join us. Just head over to the isologyhub.com.
Hello everybody, welcome to the ISO show. My name's Ian Battersby. I'm one of the senior ISO consultants at Blackmores UK Limited. Today I want to talk about communicating a management system. Why do we have to do it and what's the importance of doing it? How ought we go about doing that? It's an essential part really. Every management system requires communicating, or really it won't function at all. I often go back to one of my favourite pieces. There's a system standard to ISO 9001 called 9004. It's not about quality management systems as such. It's about the quality of an organisation and guidance to achieve sustained success. It goes beyond the requirements of the standard and gives quite a lot of guidance on how an organisation can improve beyond what's initially required. It talks about many things which are sort of direct correlations with all of the standards. The words in it are meaningful whether you're talking about quality or information or energy or environment. And there's a clause at 7.4 which mirrors what's happening in the other standards on communication. And it says that the effective communication of policies, strategy, relevant objectives is essential to the sustained success of an organisation. It also says that communication should be meaningful, timely and continual, and there should be some form of feedback within it to be able to address changes in the organisation's context. So this is ever changing. It's not a one-time thing. Communication just doesn't happen once. What's changing is your context, your strategy, your system, your people. Their behaviour, their culture might change over time as well. Hence, your way of communicating should adapt. 9004 goes on and says that communication processes should be both vertical and horizontal and be tailored to the differing needs of its recipients, whether they're internal recipients or external recipients. So it's all ways, it goes in every direction through the organisation and beyond it to the world outside, the world affected by your management system. The standard also talks about people at some length, and it talks about engaged, empowered and motivated people, and they are a key resource. They enhance an organisation's ability to create and deliver value, so the organisation should have process in place for engaging those people. And managers at all levels should encourage people to be involved in improving the performance of the organisation and in meeting the organisation's objectives. So it's not just in all directions, internally and externally, it's at all levels as well, management at every functional level, supporting the employees to improve the organisation's performance. And this principle applies regardless of standard. All standards require this engagement, empowerment, and motivation of people in order to succeed. And that fundamentally relies on communicating to them the principles of the management system that we're talking about. On the face of it, each standard addresses communication in clause 7.4, which is unsurprisingly entitled communication. And to some extent, it's also covered in 7.3 awareness. They're not exactly the same, the two clauses, but they are complementary. The clause on awareness focuses on employees, and in some standards, that actually is defined as anybody under the organisation's control. In some, it just says workers. So that language varies, but it means the same sort of thing. It's the internal, the internal population rather than the external interested parties. And in awareness, it requires us to share the policy of the management system, any relevant objectives, and to promote to employees their own contribution to a system. And we should also stress the implications of not conforming to the management system. What happens if we go our own way and don't follow the rules of the business, don't follow policy, procedure, process? Some standards also mention risks, hazards, incidents, and outcome of investigations, such as 45,001 on health and safety. So there's an extension to it in some ways, but the focus is on internal people. In clause 7.4, which is communication, that's about determining internal and external communications which are relevant, okay? So what, when, to whom, how, and who does it? Now in 9001, that's all it says. It's up to you. You choose what's relevant and how you do that. Some standards, again, add more detail. Again, 14 and 45,001 discuss communication regarding legal requirements, but they don't go on to say what you ought to do specifically. They say these things need to be considered and determined. But there's content in all sorts of places regarding communication throughout every standard. Firstly, all standards say communicate the policy. Again, doesn't say how. But what they all say is that policy should be available and maintained as documented information. So there should be a document, a written document, which is the organisation's policy. It then says this should be communicated and understood and applied within the organisation, and it should be available to relevant interested parties as appropriate. So not all of them, don't give everybody it. But what's interesting here, it says you should communicate it and make sure it's understood and applied. How? How on earth do you make sure that something has been understood by any single person and that it will subsequently be applied in their sphere of work? This is tricky. If you were to audit people and ask them to demonstrate this, I think nearly everybody would fail because it's an impossibility. Now, I wouldn't expect every employee to regurgitate a policy of any kind verbatim. It's like parrot it, fashion out. But I would expect them to know where to find the policy and to have at least a basic understanding of its implications for them. Okay? I have known certification assessors to walk the shop floor and ask random personnel what they know about a policy, where to find it, what role does it hand them in the organisation, what happens if they don't apply the policy. So you could be asked at any time, but it's a tricky one to actually ever demonstrate that everybody understands and applies. Also, in clause 5, there's a very strong role for leadership in communicating. All of the following requirements I'm going to mention are explicitly aimed at leadership without any option for them to delegate it to other people. It doesn't say they shall ensure something will happen. It says these words. They shall promote the use of the process approach. and risk-based thinking, not delegating that promotion. They should communicate the importance of the management system and of conforming to that management system's requirements. They should engage, direct and support persons to contribute to the effectiveness of the system. They should promote improvement. They should support other relevant managers to demonstrate their leadership in their areas of responsibility. So none of those allow for delegation. They are all leadership's role as part of a management system. So leadership have a very big part to play in communicating. And we've talked about leadership in the past on our podcasts here on the ISO show, that systems live and die by the strength of the leadership behind them. Then in clause 5.3, top management shall ensure, so they don't have to do it themselves, but they shall ensure that the responsibilities and authorities for relevant roles are assigned, communicated and understood within the organisation. Again, that's a tricky one. It's not just about communicating, it's communicating and making sure that that communication has been received and is then applied. And again, we have communication in 6.2, which is objectives. Objectives must be established and communicated as relevant, not to everybody, not in all detail to all people. So, yes, you choose who the right audience for communicating objectives is. So that summarises sort of some of the main requirements in standards relating to communication. But what do you do about this? How do you manage all of this? I've talked, and colleagues have talked many times about the way we use language in talking to other people when it comes to standards and management systems, and also other related matters of legislation and regulation. This is a language which is quite often alien to most people, even people who work in these spheres, who understand that their own role, whether that might be in environmental management or health and safety, don't always come from a background where they've been immersed in standards and the language of standards. And not everybody needs to know about every clause. If you're trying to tell people about the worth of a management system, the best way to destroy any goodwill and to disengage them entirely is to start talking about there being 64 clauses in ISO 9001 and what those clauses are. They don't need to know. What we need to do is talk about what it does for them, what it does for the organisation, for the customer, for the planet, for the people who are the interested parties, what it does in their world while they're at work. So the first principle of any form of communication regarding management systems is to keep it simple. To translate those words in standards into common language, the language of their business. That's, not necessarily or always straightforward when we're talking about process conformity, when we're talking about monitoring, measurement, evaluation, when we're talking about the principles of internal audit. Yeah, we know what they mean, and quite a lot of people do, but most people are scared of terminology such as this. So talk about it in what it means to them and what it means to their daily lives. And also keep it brief. Communication, which goes on for too long, tends to have people lose interest. But also we need to allay fears. Management systems aren't about tearing up systems and starting again. Not for the most part, anyway. There have been some where I've looked and thought, bin that, and, we need to do something completely different. But for many, things won't change hugely. They'll follow the operational processes and procedures in the way they've done through their normal working lives. For many people, that's the meat, the focus of a management system, those operational procedures. They may be hosted in a new environment for them. They may have different document control, maybe a different look and feel. Things may link up differently between different parts of systems. One thing may jump to another in a different manner. But try to focus to communicate the familiar to people so that if the core of their activities isn't changing, make them feel comfortable that that's what's going to be consistent for them in the future. By all means, we need to describe what will change, And what we do need to talk to people about with management systems is what I've talked about earlier, which is the need to conform and the need to look for improvement. These are fundamental parts of all management systems. And looking for improvement and the tools we use to improve are what we should then be trying to communicate beyond what was the norm for people before. Now, we do have to communicate policy. It is a fundamental requirement of every standard. Policy isn't for sticking away on a hidden drive which isn't shared with anybody. It's not for posting in the MD's office. It's for communicating the intent of top management in an organisation. It's what leadership want to happen. And it's their way of saying to the world, either internally or externally, this is what we believe in and this is what we're trying to do. And people need to understand that and they need to know their place. But if it has to be communicated to everybody, try not to make them huge. Step number one. Policies on one page make sense as long as you've encompassed all the vision, values, strategy and top management commitment that you want to. And as long as they meet the requirements of a standard, and they hold all those things in them around improvement, legal compliance, that sort of thing, which every standard looks for. So yeah, keep it punchy. Some organisations believe that policies should have all arrangements and procedures enclosed within them. That's fine. If that's what your policy on policies is, that's okay. But don't hang that on your canteen wall as 48 pages, expecting anybody to read through it and understand it and apply it. Because remember, they have to understand and apply. So it has to be written in a language they understand and manageable for them to be able to pick up and say, oh, I get that. I know my part. And also use different ways to promote a policy to reach as wide an audience as possible. There are multiple channels you could use. You can use emails, your intranet, your SharePoint, Teams channels. It can go up as a poster. But consider this. How can you know if they've understood it and applied it? Do you then put in place feedback mechanisms from that in particular, which say from an email, a voting button, yes, I read it, a SharePoint page where you go on and you collect names of people who viewed it? Do you deliver it in sessions where people sign into the session and you explain to them the policy and that it will be available to them? There are different ways of doing it, and your organisation may have ways through a learning management system where a very, very short presentation introducing a policy could then be something which is clicked on by all as a mandatory thing, and you then have metrics on how many people have looked at it. There are so many different ways to promote a policy. But also you want to promote your entire management system. Okay, you want to promote messages from that system. You want to promote changes. You want to promote learning. Learning may come from so many different sources. It may come from, you may have done an internal audit and discovered that certain processes need to improve. You need to communicate what you've learnt and what needs to improve. You may have a health and safety management system collecting information on incidents, near misses, hazard spotting, safety observation, whatever you want to call it. What have you learnt from this and how are you going to present this back? Will it be regular safety briefings? Will it be things on notice boards? But will it be some of the other ways of doing things? Electronic displays are really quite good now in presenting messages to people. Static images on a wall, policies, safety notes, whatever might be on your wall, people will become blind to after a certain period of time. So electronic displays can easily feed to people a rotating message that helps to engage them in what's new today, what's changed, what's happening, what did we learn from our management system. Also, there are company briefs, team meetings, town halls as some people call them now, various briefings at different levels in different organisations where the employees can be addressed with direct messaging about new systems, about the introduction of policy, about the learning from events, about the learning from non-conformity of process, audit, whatever it might be, and about what that means in impacting their role. But also these types of meetings, direct meetings with people, allow leadership to address people and allow them to fulfill those requirements I mentioned earlier. And they also allow some form of leadership by example, by the people who have their names on the policy, have adopted the policy and direct policy, being able to directly address people to say this means something to us, so it should mean something to you. And then how do you measure that any of this ever works? There are various means by which you can do it through what I've mentioned before in terms of the electronic media, the email voting, the LMS systems, the SharePoint pages. But there are other ways. You may wish to conduct surveys with your people to find out what they understand about your management systems, what they feel works and doesn't work. Also, during audit, there is an opportunity for any person at any level in the organisation to be involved. And their honest opinion on what works and what doesn't is quite useful. And that can help in the monitoring, the measuring of processes and the identification of non-conformity. And that can contribute to any analysis of gaps in your system in order to improve the communication in the future. And then you should be thinking about how you adjust strategies based on the different methods you've employed. But it really is about employing as many strategies as you can to reach the right sorts of audiences. Now that's internal. I'm not going to dwell hugely on external communication, but I'm going to talk about where I think you ought to begin when you're discussing external communications. In clause 4, which is around the context of the organisation, understanding the context, in clause 4.2 specifically, we are required to understand the needs and expectations of interested parties. And we go through an exercise with clients and we list out those interested parties, whether they're internal, whether they're external. And we go through an analysis of what they would expect from our management system and us as an organisation. And that's a good exercise here. The standards don't say write a communications plan, but they do say who's going to communicate what to whom and how and when. So the interested parties table we have identifies what those interested parties are actually interested in and what we ought to communicate about. So that forms a very good basis. You could extend on that or use parts of that in order to write a communications plan. And then you could then adapt your communication strategies with those interested parties and see that they address the needs and expectations. What we don't have to do is bombard every external party with the same form of communication. Not everybody wants to see our policy. Not everybody wants to see that we've been certified. Not everybody wants to see that we've trained X number of personnel in a quality management system and Y personnel are competent in environmental management or any of those sorts of things. But some people do want demonstrations of certain things. And that should be listed in the interested parties table, the needs and expectations. So the communications we develop should be based around that. And then we can then verify whether the communications we have in place then meet the requirements of their needs and expectations. So it's a good starting point. There are so many things we could talk about in terms of needs and expectations of interested parties, but that will go on for possibly days. So I think I'll leave there. What I've tried to explain is where the requirements for communicating both internally and externally are, what that means from a leadership and a management level, how we ought to talk to our people about what it means to them, and also touch on where we should begin in the world of communicating with our external parties. And that's a rather large conversation to continue. So hopefully that's given you a little insight. It's a toe in the water in many ways, I suppose. But hopefully there is some insight there. So thank you for listening. That's all on this ISO show for today. Before I go, can I just remind anybody listening to subscribe on your preferred media player if you've not already done that. If you've got any chance, please give us 5 minutes and leave us a nice review. 5 stars would be fabulous. The review mechanism does help us to launch towards a wider audience, so it'd be really helpful. If you've got any questions, suggestions for future topics, because we really want to hear what people want to hear about, so feel free to just comment on the pages or email us, and we'd love to hear from anybody. So that's all from me today. Thanks for listening, and hopefully we'll catch up with you on the next ISO show. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.